joy and success. Every day's a chance for happiness. Yes, we can live a beautiful, crazy plan. Every day's a celebration. Every day's a celebration.
Hello and welcome to the Great Song Adventure. We have a seasonal episode for you today. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Louise. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. We've been away a while.
We have, but we're back. And it's holiday time.
It is. There are lights on the Christmas tree.
Yeah. That we're in Los Angeles where it's sunny and beautiful and warm. It's a great place to celebrate the holidays, I think.
I love the seasonal snow, but every once in a while it's nice to not have to shovel and not have to travel with all that. I think
it's always great.
Yeah.
Growing up in Chicago, and I go there around Thanksgiving and get out of there before the big snow comes because everyone goes crazy. You know, they get nuts.
I wonder why people go crazy over the holidays. You know, you think after the ritualistic nature of it for a while, they'd go, oh, yeah, I remember how I was last year. I'm not going to go crazy this year. But we do every year.
Yeah. And there it's also because they know they have like 6 months at least of darkness and ice and cold. They're not looking forward to that. You know, it's not a quick thing to get through.
Yeah, and the same seasonal songs come on every year. We don't tire of them, or maybe we do. We certainly could use...
I think you tire of them. You mentioned that you were...
Yeah, I think we need more Christmas songs or more seasonal songs. But speaking of songs...
Yes. A good subject.
Yeah, speaking of songs, we have an amazing episode, which we've been waiting a while to be able to share with our listeners.
Yeah, I'm really happy we were able to do this. We got an interview with the legendary Mike Stoller of the Leiber and Stoller songwriting team, who have written so many classics and rock and roll classics, starting with Hound Dog, you know, which a guy named Elvis recorded, I think. He had a hit with that. And so many great songs, Stand By Me and Jailhouse Rock, and you know, earlier songs like Yakety Yak and Poison Ivy, and then later on, Is That All There Is, that Peggy Lee did in that whole album. You know, I had interviewed them together years ago, and they'd been together a long time. It was like an old married couple. Something you might know about married people.
With Jerry Leiber, his
Jerry
partner
Leiber.
of 60 years, who passed away.
Yeah,
yes.
Just a few years ago. And Jerry wrote the words, and Mike Stoller wrote the music. But like any couple that's been together for decades, they had their stories kind of together, you know, and they told them a lot. So I noticed interviewing Mike alone, he shifted some of the stories. Suddenly he took them to places that we didn't get before, and I thought that was really interesting. He kind of opened up in a whole different way because he was on his own.
A hummingbird just flew right next to your head, which is a definite, it's a joyous sign.
You know, they produced so early on, the term producer hadn't been used before them, and they thought, no, we should say director. But for some reason it was producer, but they were really the first ones to officially be the producers.
That's fantastic. You mean like the first writer-producers?
Well, the first one to use that term, you know, like I think before they might have called it arrangers or orchestrators, but the producer was doing all of it, putting the whole thing together. And they certainly were among the first writer-producers. They were writing their own songs. And like you said, that's really why they produced it. They wanted to get it right.
I loved that.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me still that they wrote some of the classic rock and roll songs. They were architects of rock and roll, yet that wasn't their thing to write rock and roll. They were writing blues. And Hound Dog was written for Big Mama Thornton, a whole different kind of song. And that one they didn't produce. When Elvis did it, that was a production they had nothing to do with. And they weren't crazy about it. Mm-hmm. One of the most famous records of all time. They thought it could have been better. They liked Big Mama's version. So I love that when you really get to the heart of the thing. At the same time, they recognized that was a good record for them, Hound Dog. And then they worked with Elvis a lot after that, and he talks about that.
We have it in 2 parts because it was such a long interview. He was so generous with his time. I think we said, you know, we just need a half hour, 45 minutes of your time, and I think we were there couple of hours, which is not bad for a man born in the 30s.
Yes.
He's still got it.
Yeah, he's got a lot of energy. 85 years old.
Yeah. Shall we have a listen to part 1?
Sounds like a good idea. Here's on the Great Song Adventure, here's our talk with Mike Stoller.
We're rolling.
What's interesting, some of your songs, many of them, have many versions, and different versions are great. Why did certain ones get propelled?
I don't know. I'm not Sure. I mean, I know, for example, that Big Mama Thornton's Hound Dog was a hit. It was a hit at a time when the market was totally segregated, and that was the blues area, or the rhythm and blues actually was the black people's chart, as opposed to the quote pop unquote charts. And we knew that was a hit before it came out. We were waiting and waiting for them to release it. Took them a long time.
Well, it's quite a record. I mean, the way she sings that, there's nothing like it.
Well, that's the original version, and it was, to some degree, even the whole attitude was kind of based upon or inspired by her person.
Yeah.
You know? We met her one afternoon at Johnny Otis's house. He asked us to come. He needed songs for her. And we took off and went to my house, which wasn't that far away, and then came back with the song, you know, half an hour after having met her. And
That's amazing, a half an hour
That's
later.
a fast.
yeah,
So I asked once, did you write it on piano? And he said, no, we wrote it on the car. You were just banging on the car singing.
well, yeah, and the piano.
You did go to the piano.
Oh, sure. But I didn't bother to sit down. We were in a hurry.
But it was that kind of blues that you could do.
Yeah.
Just like...
Yeah.
Jerry mentioned that he didn't think that was even strong enough, Hound Dog, that it was really meant to be, you're nothing but a motherfucker, you know, it was really strong. And
Yeah, he did, but I told him, no, Hound Dog is real good.
that worked well, huh?
And I said, besides, you know, they'll play it on the radio. And they did. Kansas City, well, that was another problem. The first record of Kansas City, which I'm still fond of, was Little Willie Littlefield.
Yes.
And after the record was recorded, we were very happy with it. And the owner of the record company, who also had the publishing rights, as was common in those days, he said, you know, guys, you know what's really hip? KC. KC is hip. So on the label, he changed the title of the song. It's Kansas City, but he called it KC Lovin'. And, you know, sold a few records.
Right, because that's the hook, Kansas City. That's the title.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it was dumb.
You think that's what hurt that record, that the title was wrong?
Yeah, and the weird thing is, Jerry and I mentioned, you know what would be great? Remember that song, because that was the only record we knew of at that time. That was 1952. And it was, about 7 years later, I said, you know what would be great? Maybe we could get Joe Williams to record it with Count Basie's band. So we put in a call to a guy named Teddy Reeg, who kind of managed Basie. We looked in Billboard the next issue, and there were 7 records of Kansas City.
7.
Including
Wow.
Wilbert Harrison, who apparently remembered the song, and they put it out, and it became #1.
And Hank Ballard, Little Richard,
Yeah, they were all.
Rocky Olson.
There were tons of.
But Wilbur Harrison had the hit, right?
He had the hit, yeah, and it was a good record. Although at the beginning, if you listen carefully, it sounded like he was off mic at the beginning of the song.
That kind of makes it even more
It's
authentic.
kinda weird,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like you're not trying too hard when you're doing that.
And that band, the Beatles, they recorded that song too.
Yeah, they did a version of the Little Richard version, and Little Richard, his record came out. It was released as a single, and it said Kansas City, Leiber and Stoller. But he threw in some other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the Beatles did it, it's his version, which had, what, Hey, 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 or something like that.
It changes the melody, too.
And, but the original record of his is the same version the Beatles did, but it's just credited to Leiber and Stoller. But theirs, they credited Leiber and Stoller and Penniman. We said, that's fine, because we were such fans of Richards.
That was fine.
Yeah, he was so good.
Well, since you mentioned that, I wanted to ask you, because as you know, Elvis, with the Colonel, usually had that deal with songwriters that Elvis's name would go on the song as well. Not ever with your songs, though, so I assume that you did not allow that sort of thing.
We did not allow it, but we went for some of that cut-in, royalty cut-in. But we would not allow anybody else's name to be put on unless they were a co-writer.
So you started off really loving jazz before rock and roll, right?
Well, before I met Jerry, I was a real modern jazz fan, and I used to hang out on 52nd Street in New York when I was 14, 15, 16, till I moved to L.A. And I would hang out and see Charlie Parker and Miles Davis and all the great, wonderful jazz musicians, Thelonious Monk. And it's funny, when Jerry, in the introduction, when Jerry called me, because we had not met, and he got my phone number from a drummer I'd played a dance in East L.A. with. And after he went through a whole series of questions as to if I was Mike Stoller and did I play the piano and could I write notes on paper and all of that. And he asked me he announced that he was Jerome Leiber and he was a lyricist. And how would you like to write songs with me? And I said, no. And he said, well, why not? I said, I don't like the songs I hear on the radio. He said, well, what do you like? And I said, I like Bartok, Stravinsky, Charlie Parker, and Thelonious Monk. And he said, well, nevertheless, I think we ought to meet. And I said, if you want to come over, come over. And that's how we met. And, of course, my first love was Boogie Woogie. And when I was 8 years old, when he came over, I started playing some blues, he started singing, and we shook hands, and we said we'll be partners. And that was in 1950, and we were partners for 61 years.
Did he show you some lyrics? Was that part of it that he had some?
Sure, he showed me I said, are those your lyrics? He had I was being aggressive. He had a speckled notebook, composition book, and he had a line of lyrics and a line of ditto marks and then a rhyming line. I said, these are 12-bar blues. He said, they are? Well, I guess that's what I write then.
So do you still play Boogie Woogie?
No.
Isn't it fun?
Yeah, well, I used to. When I was, I played probably better Boogie Woogie when I was 10 than I can now.
When you were watching all that jazz, did you want to be a jazz pianist? Was that
I
the idea?
did want to be. But then I think, I moved out here with my folks when I was 16. And I realized that I would never become a jazz musician that I would want to listen to, And so I started to study composition, music composition privately, with a guy who did a lot of orchestrations for film music and so on. And I think Jerry called me on the phone about 2 months or so after I started studying composition. And so...
Did you continue to study that?
Yeah, I did for a while. And I wrote some pieces and so on. I had a piece played by the Santa Monica Symphony. And I wrote a quartet for woodwinds and strings mixed, and stuff like that.
Can I ask? Oh,
yeah.
okay. I was just going to ask about Phil Spector. He was influenced by the sound that you and Jerry were creating on your records and took it.
Well, that was later, yeah, but we were using multiple players on the same instruments, which is something that he then did, but we used them differently. In other words, if we had 4 guitar players, each one was doing something different. And when Phil started with his the Wall of Sound or whatever, he had everybody doing the same thing. It was like power.
Yeah.
It was a different take, you know. And he was very effective.
Yes.
In terms of Spanish Harlem, my understanding is he really wanted to work with you guys. It took him a long time to keep trying to get to you guys so you would write a song.
Well, he
with
was
him.
trying to get to Jerry at that point. And it's funny, I was supposed to meet with him. We were going to write a song, but I hadn't had dinner with my children in a long time. So I told him I'll join you later. And I called after dinner with my kids and said, "Oh no, we finished the song already." So I'm not on that song, but I did create the part that's on the original record, the marimba, which is dee 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 dee. I thought they
important
should have
part.
given me a piece of it, but no.
I thought that they did. But it's
No.
true that Phil really worked for a long time to finally get Jerry to agree to work with him, right? It
Right.
wasn't right away. 'Cause
Yeah.
he was a kid, right, basically?
Yeah, he was. I'm trying to think what year he came to New York in around 1960. When Jerry and I would have been what, 27?
Yeah, Spanish Harlem was 1960.
Yeah.
And Benny King
So-
was the singer.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That was his first session as a solo artist.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah, his manager, he had a manager named Al Wild who pulled Ben out of the group and called and asked if we would agree to produce Ben as a solo artist, and we said sure. And that was the first session we did was had 4 songs, and one was Spanish Harlem and one was Stand By Me.
Wow. Kind of helped his career in a big way, making that choice.
Yeah,
Benny King.
I guess it did.
Now, with Stand By Me, I used to assume that it was one of those deals like Elvis where Benny King got his name on the song, though he didn't write it, but he came in with part of it. Is that how it went?
He knew he had taken the concept of it from there's a gospel song called Stand By Me. Yeah. And Ben is definitely a writer of Stand By Me.
That bass line, the famous bass line.
That's mine.
That's you. I don't know if you heard it, Louise. They did that song at the royal wedding recently.
I heard
Stand By Me.
Yeah, it was so beautiful. It was different, and it was this black choir in England. That was really special.
It's beautiful. I thought they might have, an English version, but they did it right. They got those singers right. It was soulful.
Beautiful.
Choir.
Beautiful choice.
Yeah, I was up in Maine at that time. The first time I'd ever been in Maine, but it was opening night of Smokey Joe's Cafe in a pre-New York out-of-town production in Ogunquit, Maine. And that was opening night. And then after, there was a party, and when I woke up in the morning, I had 100 emails from all over the world about that. Yeah.
So you didn't know ahead of time that they were
I
gonna
knew
use
that I had heard that it was among some songs that were selected that would or might be performed at the royal wedding.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know that it
was
was going to
televised.
be the song
Yeah.
and all of that, yeah.
It was beautiful. I think she chose it, right? Is that right, the bride?
Yes.
Yeah, so she has
Yeah.
good taste in music, obviously.
Yeah,
But
that's
it
a
was
good thing.
perfect, too. I mean, it is almost like a hymn, especially done like that. So it was so
It was
beautiful.
beautiful, yeah. I love that.
They had some interesting harmonies. I'm sure you noticed on the vocals.
Yeah, I was sorry, that Jerry and Ben couldn't be there to see it. Yeah, Ben was a very sweet man.
Yeah. Also, there's a famous version of that, this group called Playing for Change. It goes all around the world and had musicians.
Oh, yeah,
Have
yeah.
you seen that? And people all over the world singing Stand By Me, and they cut it together. And it has to be a strong song to hold
Yeah,
on to that.
Norman Lear called me, and he said, I want to play you something. And I hadn't seen that yet. And he said, come to my office. I did, and he had the TV thing on, and I sat there for half an hour watching it.
It's great, isn't it?
It was very nice.
But I don't think any song could work like that. I mean, that song is so special, that it could hold up to that kind of thing.
Well, it was part of an album of a number of songs that were done, but that seemed to be the standout.
Oh, the greatest. And
The
John,
bass line and the lyric and the simplicity of it and the message, all of it.
yeah. John Lennon also recorded it.
Mm-hmm.
But do you know when you're writing that this one's special at the time?
No, not always.
Yeah.
I mean, not really. I mean, when I started playing the bass pattern,
Mm-hmm.
I was playing the piano and Ben was singing, and Jerry had been working with Ben on lyrics. And it was in our old office in New York. And when I developed the bass pattern, Jerry said, okay, now we got a hit. But he didn't know.
But he was right, though.
He was right.
Well, you were writers and producers, so were you thinking about when you were writing a song, the artist you were writing for, or were you writing a song to be a great song for song's sake? Or were you tailoring it for the artist who was going to sing it?
I think we almost always, not always, but almost always wrote a song for an artist, and we found that we were writing blues and R&B, and if we had a lead sheet or even a simple demo, and it was sent to an A&R man at Capitol or Columbia, if they recorded it, it never came out the way it was supposed to be in our minds. So we became, for self-protection, we became producers. And so then we formed a group. We needed an artist, and like originally the Robins, and then it became the Coasters, two of the Robins and two other people, and so on. And so we wrote for them, and we knew what they could do. And we wrote for the different voices, and they became different characters in, So
That makes sense.
And so we wrote for them.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the incarceration songs, the Cell Block for the Robins and then Jailhouse Rock, to have two songs focused on, have those words in it. Where do you think Jerry got that inspiration from?
Well, Jailhouse Rock, the inspiration was there was a mention in the script of an amateur contest in the prison.
Mm-hmm.
A script of an Elvis movie being
Yes.
made.
Yeah,
And you hired to write songs
it wasn't called Jailhouse Rock until we wrote 4 songs, including Jailhouse Rock. It was called Ghost of a Chance.
Oh, That's a whole other song.
which is a very good song, by the way, but it's had nothing to do with the script. That's where the idea came from. And what's the first one you mentioned?
There's a song for the Robins.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And there was one before that, even, by the Robins, called 10 Days in Jail. That was an earlier record that we didn't produce, but we wrote the song.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think probably it had to do with a sense of African-American young men that frequently were jailed. They were unfairly imprisoned.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an aspect of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
It still is. Not maybe not to the same degree, but it still is. And even if there was some humor attached, you know, it was about what was going on.
That's interesting.
There was another song we wrote called "Framed."
Mm-hmm.
Also, it was about a court scene. You know, again, the same idea.
Yeah.
Did those come because Jerry suggested we should write about this? How did those ideas get born to write about those subjects? Did it start with lyrics?
I would think so, but you know, we had the same values and had the same sense of humor, and we were very close on those ideas. But Jerry's a brilliant lyric writer, so we worked on them together. But the ideas and the best lines, of course, came from him.
But you would work on the words and music together?
Yeah, we did. We worked on everything early on.
Louise was asking, kind of, your parents did that somewhat. People think it's one or the other always with you guys.
My dad, Jerry with a G, wouldn't. I mean, he didn't play. He really wanted to play, but he'd often say to my mom, "Go up, go up. The melody's gotta go up there."
Yeah, and I had that. Jerry would say that to me also. He said, "I don't like the last note. It's gotta."
Yeah, you use your hands. You gesture and.
Would you take that advice, or would you?
Sometimes. Sometimes we'd fight, you know, because we met so young, so we were like brothers, you know, and we'd fight like brothers, and we'd get along like brothers.
I remember, and there are certain things you've always disagreed about for years. There were certain disagreements, right?
Oh, sure, sure. He didn't want a melody with Kansas City.
Oh.
He wanted it to sound like just some blues singer just improvising on blues. And I said, I want something so that if a band is playing it instrumentally, you would know it was that song.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good point.
That was my point.
Yeah.
However, there were a lot of records made after the original two, which had the melody. Some of them abandoned the melody, some performers.
But it distinguishes you as a writer that it is a blues, but it's got a great melody.
It's got a tune.
Yeah, and a good melody.
A question about Hound Dog. So, were you not producing those Elvis records because he changed the lyrics from the original?
He didn't change them. There was kind of a rockabilly group.
Freddie Bell?
Thank you. Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys. And I think they were appearing in a lounge in Vegas. And that's where he heard them doing the song, and he wanted to do it. Now, I think because he knew blues and blues artists, when we first met him, we were surprised that this guy knew as much about blues and R&B as we did. So I'm sure he knew Big Mama's record, but that was a woman's song. And the Freddie Bell and the Bellboys were doing something that a guy could sing.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, there's that they never caught a rabbit. That's not even in the original. And I think the kind of aggressiveness of the line, "You ain't nothing but a hound dog," is what that whole song is about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that,
It's also percussive. You ain't never caught a rabbit,
yeah, it works. Jerry seemed to be really upset that the lyrics were changed, but did you feel that way, or did you like Elvis's version pretty much? I mean, when you
Well,
first...
I have to, I've been interviewed so often about that, and so I'll tell you what I always say, which is true, up to a point it's true, was that I didn't like Elvis's record when I first heard it because it didn't have that groove. It's kind of a dun, 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 and the original was a really interesting
Slinky.
there you go, rhythm, and insinuating rather than hammering.
Mm-hmm.
But after it sold 7 million singles, I began to see some merit in it.
They also sped it up. I understood you thought it was maybe too fast the way Elvis did.
Oh, yeah. But it's not my favorite Elvis recording of our songs, but I love almost everything else.
He did 20 altogether, 20 of your songs. If I got it right. More than 20.
Yeah.
But as you're saying, with Jailhouse Rock, you guys were in New York to write those songs. And if I got the story right, you wanted to go out and hear jazz, and the publisher said, "No, you got to stay here and write." So you wrote 4 songs.
One afternoon, yeah.
That's your
We
4
were
songs.
kind of locked in our hotel room with a upright piano, and he came over. Gene Aberbach of Hill and Rain songs, and they also controlled Elvis Presley music. So we had come to New York and been given a script, which we didn't even look at. We were having a ball. We were going to jazz clubs and theater and, having a wonderful time. And one morning while we were having breakfast, Gene Auerbach arrived, and he said, "Boys, where are my songs?" And I remember Jerry said, "Don't worry, Gene, you'll have them." And he said, "I know, I'm not leaving till I have them." And he sat down in a big chair, overstuffed chair, and put it in front of our only exit, and took a nap. And we wrote 4 songs, and we got out of there. Jailhouse Rock, Treat Me Nice, You're So Square, Baby, I Don't Care. And the last one, which
Loving
was
You? Or no, I Want to Be Free.
I Want to Be Free, which had another meaning for us. We could get out of the hotel.
That was the last one you wrote?
Yeah.
Was Jailhouse Rock the first one you wrote, do you remember?
I don't remember.
Well, I've heard that story, but that's one of those like superhero songwriter stories that you wrote 4 songs. But what was that session like? Were you guys just completely confident, well, let's just write 4 and you could do that, write 4 songs like that easily?
Yeah, I think we felt that we could. And we did.
How many hours did that take, do you recall?
About 5.
Good work.
About 5 hours. Yeah.
How about Is That All There Is?
Well, that was a very different situation. Jerry had recited the lyrics to me, the spoken words.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they were, the vignettes. And I loved them. And I said, well, they should remain spoken. And I set them to music. And we played it for this wonderful English actress, singer, Georgia Brown. And she was going to be going back to, she'd been on Broadway in a show called
Is it Oliver?
Oliver. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And she was going to go back to London, and BBC was going to do a special on her. So she was looking for material, and she loved it. She said, perfect, but I need something to sing. So we trotted something out that she said, that is it. And she left, and we looked at each other and said, that doesn't make any sense. So I said, look, I'll go home and work on some music. And Jerry said, well, I'll come up, with some lyric idea for something to sing. And I called him the next morning. I said, I got the music. I know I got the right tune. And he said, well, I don't really want to hear it because I wrote the lyrics and I know that they are right, and I don't want to have to change anything. So I said, well, let me play you So I went over and we had a big to-do about, he wanted me to hear the words first, and I wanted him to hear the music first, and finally he said, all right, go ahead and play it. And I did, and he said, play it again, and he sang the words. We didn't have to change anything. They just fit, which that had never happened to us before. And there's only one rhyme in the whole thing. Have a ball, if that's all there is. That's the only rhyme.
Eternal.
And that seems so different from your normal kind of songs. Had you written other songs with that kind of feeling?
Well, we wrote some others, but but I must say this, that when we played it for Peggy, and she loved it, and we got Randy Newman to do the arrangement and orchestration. And I believe at one meeting Jerry had suggested that he write it like a film score. And the first two verses, he added stuff that was just wonderful.
You guys were familiar with Randy, what he could do even then, huh?
Well, we had just heard the first album of his stuff.
Which had a lot of orchestra on it and all those
Yeah.
arrangements, yeah.
And so he really added a lot.
That song, that kind of philosophy, is that all there is? Was that pretty much both of you, or is that Jerry?
That came from, Jerry had read a novella by Thomas Mann called Disillusionment. And I don't think it's any of the words in the song are in that novella, but it was the idea that turned him on.
It's amazing the way the words and the music fit together. That's really unusual.
That's beautiful.
Usually in your earlier songs, did you do that where you would write separately and come together with two pieces, or would you work together?
Usually, at the beginning, it was like spontaneous combustion. I would jam at the piano, I'd be playing something or come up with part of a tune, and of course we'd both be smoking. Back then, we smoked all the time.
Cigarettes, we're talking.
Yeah.
Well, you see them in the old photographs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Jerry would walk around and shouting anything that came into his mind. Sometimes just words, sometimes a phrase. And then if something sounded good, we'd stop and we'd work on it.
It's interesting. I thought of Jerry just moving around and blurting out lyrics.
Yeah.
Some of those early songs, I was looking at lyrics like yakety yak. There's so much lingo and slang. They're not poetry. They're about conversational reels, like street language often.
Well, that was written at his house in New York, his apartment. And I just came up with a funny kind of piano. It's a rhythm, but it sounds like it's guitars or something. I played it for him, and he just shouted out, "Take out the papers and the trash." And I yelled back, "Oh, you don't get no spending cash." And then he said, "Oh, there's a song."
So sometimes you
But
would
Jerry
answer.
always said, he always said, but I wasn't writing a song. I was just telling you to take out the papers and the trash.
That's our interview, part 1, with Mike Stoller.
So great to hear him talk about them in action, how they actually wrote. And it's similar with your parents, too, that the lyricist sometimes is doing some of the music and the composer's coming up with lines. It's not that clearly delineated, their roles.
I like the way he describes their relationship. It sounds like there was a lot of push and pull that made everything better.
Yeah, it seemed like the two of them never got bored with each other. They got sometimes exasperated, like you will with anyone you've been together with for decades, but there was so much love there and mutual respect.
I also love when we went there were 2 pianos set up facing each other, remember?
Yeah, 2 grand pianos.
Yeah, and he said he and his wife will sometimes play together, and his wife is a harpist.
Yes, the legendary Corky Hale, a really famous, amazing harpist who's played from Bjork to Ed Sullivan.
And
Actually, the other direction, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And the love he had in his eyes when he was describing how he met her. He said he first saw her picture on liner notes of records, and
Right.
he decided then, that he was in love with her. It's a very romantic story.
Yeah, and it was great to go. We interviewed him at his house, which is way up at the top of one of those mountains overlooking the Hollywood Hills, and just a beautiful house up there, and I was thinking, this is the house of a great songwriter. It had a really luminous, wonderful feeling to it.
It did, and the art was also great in the house. We talked about the paintings he had up there, had legendary people in history depicted in there.
Yeah, some giant paintings. And also, which I wasn't expecting, we got into politics, how they were liberals for a long time, and social justice meant a lot to them. Mm-hmm. And, impacted their songs in ways I didn't even realize.
That was part 1 of our interview with the great Mike Stoller. And we wish you a happy holiday.